I heard her moaning. Not from pain. Not from fear. From pleasure. In our bed. In the house I built with my own hands. With a man I had just fed dinner to a few hours earlier. We'd been married 50 years. Half a century. I knew every line on her face, every scar on her body. We'd been through everything, the loss of parents, raising our kids, a 12% mortgage back in '82, her breast cancer in 2004. I held her hand when the chemo took her hair. I kissed her scars and told her she was beautiful, because she was. Because that's what love was, staying when it gets hard. Staying when it hurts. That Friday night, I'd just gone out for milk. Didn't want to fight the lines at Walmart, so I walked down to Bill's store. I left at 6:40, came back at 7:15. Window was cracked open upstairs. I heard her voice before I stepped through the door. Not the voice I knew. This one was softer, breathless. She whispered his name. Scratched the wall with her nails. And I stood there on the porch, frozen. Couldn't breathe. You don't expect betrayal at 74. You think that kind of storm has passed. You think if you've made it through Vietnam, recessions, lost friends, COVID, then you're untouchable. But I was wrong. I didn't walk in. I sat on the porch, in my rocker. I listened. 20 minutes. Every second slicing through me. Then footsteps. Heavy, male. He slipped out the back door. I didn't move. She came out later, in her robe, hair damp from the shower. I looked at her and asked, "Who is he?" She didn't cry. Didn't stutter. Just stood there in silence for a long moment, then said, "He's the one who makes me feel alive again." I didn't yell. Didn't throw anything. Just turned and walked into the garage. Sat in the car we bought for our 40th anniversary. Put my hands on the wheel. Tried to breathe. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the erasure of a lifetime. All those nights I held her. All the talks about growing old, about grandkids on the porch. She threw it all away for 20 minutes of someone else's touch. I didn't tell the kids. Not yet. They don't need this. Not now. But the revenge, it started that night. Not as a scream, not as rage. As ice. Cold. Clean. Focused. She would learn what it means to lose. What it means to feel hollow, the way I felt. I didn't know how yet. But I made a promise to myself, as she would remember. Every single piece of this. Slowly. Carefully. Without a single scream. Like a surgeon. And the first thing I remembered was the name she moaned, over and over, "Oh, Mark. Mark. That bastard." I found Mark the very next morning. I hadn't really slept. Maybe 2 hours, maybe less. My mind kept pacing like an old dog that had lost its way home. It wasn't rage. Rage comes and burns out. This was something colder. Something quieter. A kind of knowing. A certainty that nothing would ever be the same, and that I had to make it right, not with fists, not with screaming, but with clarity. I had to make him feel what I felt. Not just once. Every day. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold by the time I took the second sip. I opened her old laptop, the one we got her to do Zoom calls with the grandkids. I hadn't touched it in months. Her password was still the name of our oldest son and the year he was born. I hated how easily I got in. I hated that it still felt like my life, and that it wasn't anymore. It didn't take long to find him. Mark T. Walden. Age 68. Retired construction manager. Facebook was a gift to anyone with patience and pain. His profile picture was just as I imagined, too confident for a man his age, too proud of too little. Balding, tanned, with a forced smile and mirrored sunglasses. His bio said, a lover of life, food, and meaningful connections. I stared at it for a long time. That phrase, meaningful connections, hit me like a cheap slap. What he meant was, I fuck people's wives and pretend it's poetry. He lived 2 streets over. I hadn't realized how close he was. I'd probably passed him 100 times, at the gas station, the pharmacy, the deli. I hated that I'd never noticed. I hated more that she had. I printed out his picture. Taped it to the wall in my garage, just above the workbench. Not to rage at. Not to stab or curse. To remember. To remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That this wasn't a dream. That this face was the one that laughed in my house while I bought milk. That afternoon I drove past his house. Once. Twice. Third time I parked on the opposite curb, turned off the engine. It was a modest home. White shutters. Clean lawn. No signs of damage. No dogs. No motion. Just silence. But I knew he was in there. I could feel it. I imagined him lying on a recliner, watching TV with his feet up, maybe texting her. Maybe remembering how she sounded when she moaned his name. I didn't get angry. I memorized the rhythm of his day. He came out once, trash bin in hand. Looked both ways. Didn't see me. Then again, why would he? I was just another man in another car. Another shadow in his perfect little world. He wore a t-shirt with some fishing logo on it, khaki shorts, old tennis shoes. Moved slowly. Like life had forgiven him. Like nothing could ever touch him again. I stayed until sunset. Didn't move. Didn't call anyone. I just watched. I needed to see his life. I needed to know the world that had taken mine apart. When it got dark, I went home. She was there. Sitting at the kitchen table. Eating an apple like nothing had changed. I looked at her, really looked. Saw how her hand still trembled slightly when she reached for her glass. Saw how she avoided my eyes. I said nothing. Walked past her. Down to the basement. I opened the box with our wedding photos, the letters, the souvenirs from trips, all the artifacts of a life that no longer existed. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I took each item out, one by one, and fed them to the steel drum I kept for old wood scraps. I lit the fire and watched. The letters burned first. Then the pictures. The napkin from our first date. The dried flower she kept from our 25th anniversary. One by one they vanished, and with them, the illusion of a shared history. I wasn't destroying love. I was cleansing myself of the lie that love had survived. When the fire died, I sat there for a long time. Breathing in the smoke of my former life. Then I stood up. I knew what had to come next. I wasn't just going to punish her. That would be too easy. I wasn't just going to punish him. That would be too fast. They both needed to lose everything. Slowly. Piece by piece. Dignity. Trust. Reputation. I wanted him to walk down the street and wonder who knew. I wanted her to hear his name and feel her stomach turn. Not because of guilt, but because of what I'd done. Because of what I would do. And so it began. Not a war. Not yet. Just the first breath before the storm. The first time I spoke to Mark, I made sure it seemed like coincidence. I'd been watching him for over a week by then, knew his morning routine, his grocery days, even what brand of cereal he liked. I waited until he reached for the same kind I used to buy for her, raisin bran, like it was some holy ritual. I reached beside him and said, "Never know if these are good anymore. Used to be my wife's favorite." He turned, smiled politely, and replied, "Mine too. Hard to beat the classics." I nodded, let the silence stretch just long enough, then said, "John." He shook my hand. "Mark." Simple. Casual. As if it were nothing. But my grip lingered a second longer than necessary. I wanted him to feel it, just the edge of something not quite right. Just enough for his instincts to twitch but not run. We talked about nothing for 5 minutes. Prices. Weather. The goddamn parking lot that's too small for the number of carts they cram in. It was easy. Almost too easy. He wasn't guarded. He had no idea who I was. That I'd listened to him inside my house. That I'd memorized the sound of my wife saying his name with her teeth clenched around a moan. I let a week pass. Then I bumped into him at the pharmacy. Again at the park. Each time, I smiled first. Asked about his day. Mentioned something about retirement, loneliness, missing old routines. He nodded. Relatable. Familiar. Harmless. By the fourth encounter, he offered coffee. We sat at a small diner near the highway, 2 old men pretending to be strangers. I listened more than I talked. That's the trick, let them think they're leading. He spoke of his failed marriages. 3, in fact. Spoke of lessons learned. "Never ignore what your heart tells you," he said once, stirring his coffee like it was gospel. I wanted to reach across the table and ask if his heart told him to destroy someone else's family. But I smiled. Said, "Makes sense. Life's too short, right?" He laughed. Patted my shoulder. I learned more in that hour than most men learn in years of friendship. I learned he lived alone. No real close family. That he'd been fired once for making a pass at a coworker. That he believed in karma, but only when it suited him. He invited me over 2 days later. Said I seemed like a guy who could use a drink and maybe a game on the radio. I accepted. Walked into the same house that had swallowed my dignity, my name, my trust. I looked at the couch where it might have happened. Looked at the hallway to the bedroom. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. He poured whiskey. Offered a toast. To starting over. I clinked my glass. Didn't drink. He told me about a woman. Someone special, he said, eyes twinkling like a damn teenager. She's married, yeah, but it's complicated. I smiled. Not with my mouth. Just a slight tightening of the eyes. Just enough for my soul to say, I know. He went on about her scent, her laugh, the way she made him feel like a man again. I nodded, every part of me burning, but face calm as still water. I asked if he thought it'd last. Who knows, he said. But for now, it's worth it. That night, I walked home under a sky full of silent stars, my breath tight in my chest. I'd been inside the enemy's house. Drank his whiskey. Shook his hand. Soon I'd hold more than his trust. I'd hold every string. He'd given me access. Opened the gate. And I stepped through, not as John, but as a storm dressed in silence. I didn't rush. That's the key. The human heart doesn't crumble from a blow, it erodes, slowly, from within. You don't bring a man down with a single strike. You peel him back. You let him believe he's still whole while you carve pieces out of him, bit by bit, until he looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the man staring back. By the time Mark invited me over the 3rd time, I already knew the layout of his house better than my own. I knew where he kept his insurance papers, which drawer held his old divorce files, the password he used for his Wi-Fi. I made it a point to glance, remember, catalog. Every detail. Every vulnerability. All of it, ammunition. His life was built like a shaky shed propped on good weather and dumb luck. No foundation. No real connections. Just casual flings, a few drinking buddies, and a reputation he thought was stronger than it was. I just needed to give it a push. It started small. Conversations with the owner of the bait shop Mark frequented. The man liked to gossip. I planted a seed, said Mark had once bragged about catching fish before the season opened. Kinda weird, hey? I said with a chuckle. He said he never got caught. A smirk, a shrug, a wave goodbye. That was all. The next week, I joined Mark at that same shop. He didn't notice the change in tone when the owner greeted him. Didn't notice the coldness. But I did. Then came the gun club. Mark was proud of his membership. Said it gave him a sense of purpose. So I went with him one morning, acted curious, interested. I introduced myself to the range master. Mentioned, offhand, that Mark had told me he once forgot to lock up his rifle after a night out. Said nothing happened, so no harm, right? Another seed. No judgment. Just implication. I didn't need lies. I just needed suggestions. Questions. A look here, a word there. People do the rest for you. They want to doubt. They just need permission. It wasn't about legal trouble. I wasn't trying to get him arrested. Not yet. This was deeper. Slower. I wanted him to feel it before he even knew what it was. Like standing in the ocean and realizing too late that the tide has pulled you out. He still called me friend. Invited me to watch football, to grill steaks in his backyard. He told me more about the woman. My wife. He didn't name her, but I didn't need it. I knew her perfume. I knew the way his voice changed when he spoke about her. Like she'd given him some part of himself he thought was dead. He said she made him feel 20 again. I smiled. Told him he was lucky. Told him he should keep it quiet though. Small towns don't forgive so easily. He laughed. Said he was being careful. But I knew him now. Knew his ego. He wasn't careful. He was proud. And pride is what makes a man vulnerable. The next layer was digital. I created an email address. An anonymous one. Sent a message to his ex-wife. Thought you'd want to know what Mark's been up to. He hasn't changed. Attached a blurred photo I took of him and my wife entering a coffee shop. No name. No threat. Just enough to reopen an old wound. She posted something vague on Facebook 2 days later. Some men never grow up. Sad. Her friends chimed in. One of them worked with a woman at the club Mark went to. That's how it spreads. Silent. Invisible. Until the air around him shifts. And he started to feel it. He began asking me if I thought people were acting strange. Maybe I'm being paranoid, he said one night, looking over his shoulder as we sat on his porch. I just feel like something's off. I sipped my beer. Looked at the trees swaying in the wind. Said, maybe they're just jealous. You've got something they don't. He smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. I watched him begin to shrink. Not in size, but in certainty. He spoke less boldly. Laughed less often. Started checking his phone like it might betray him. I knew what was next. When a man starts doubting the world around him, the final blow doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be well-timed. He gave me a key to his house that week. Said it was in case of emergencies. I nodded. Slipped it into my pocket. He had no idea. I wasn't just his friend. I was his reckoning. There's a moment in every hunt when the prey stops feeling safe, but still doesn't know why. That's where Mark was. He'd started to notice the shift, but not enough to act. He still called. Still invited me over. Still trusted me. That was the opening I needed. The key he gave me was more than metal. It was surrender. A symbol that he saw me as part of his life, someone reliable. Someone safe. So I used it. I waited until a Wednesday, late afternoon, when I knew he had his weekly card game across town. I parked 2 streets away, walked the rest. The neighborhood was quiet, just like always. Kids were still in school, sprinklers humming. I let myself in like I belonged. I didn't touch much. That wasn't the point. I just moved a few things. Adjusted the angle of a picture frame. Opened a drawer and left it half closed. Took one book off the shelf and placed it by the coffee table. I didn't break anything. I didn't steal. But when he came back, he would feel it. That sense that something had been disturbed. That private space was no longer truly his. He called me that evening. I could hear the tension in his voice. "John, have you ever come by when I wasn't home?" "No," I said. "Why?" "I don't know. Just, something feels off. Things moved. Could be nothing. Maybe you did it and forgot?" "Yeah. Maybe." But I knew he was thinking. And doubt was the real damage. Not what I did. But what he couldn't prove. The next step came 3 days later. There was a local veterans fundraiser, something small, community-based. Mark had offered to help run logistics, said it gave him purpose. He was proud of that role. Wore a polo with the logo. Said it made him feel useful. So I made sure he lost it. I sent an anonymous message to the event chair. Claimed I was concerned that Mark had made inappropriate comments to a female volunteer last year and might not be the best face for the organization. "I'm not trying to stir trouble," I wrote. "Just thought you should know." I attached nothing. Offered no proof. Just the suggestion. A whisper. That Monday, Mark called me in a panic. "They dropped me from the committee," he said, voice shaking. "What? Why?" They didn't say much. Just said they are reevaluating my participation. It's bullshit. You think someone said something? I don't know. Maybe. Probably just politics. But he knew. Deep down. He knew something was happening, even if he couldn't name it. And I stayed close. Reassuring. Listening. Like a good friend. "You ever feel like people are turning on you?" he asked me one night, staring into his drink. "All the time," I said. "But most of the time, it's in our heads." He nodded. But he didn't believe it. The next strike was personal. At the grocery store, I made sure to accidentally bump into a woman I knew Mark had once dated briefly. I started a casual conversation, mentioned Mark in passing. I told her he'd been going through some stuff lately, drinking a little more, acting erratic. Said I was worried about him. She nodded, concerned. Asked if he was okay. "I'm not sure," I said. "Just, keep an eye out, okay?" That was all it took. A week later, Mark told me she'd blocked him on Facebook. Said she hadn't returned his last 2 messages. "Maybe she's busy," I offered. He didn't answer. Just looked away. I watched him sink further into himself. No accusations. No confrontations. Just the slow rot of isolation. He still saw me as a friend. But now, he also saw me as a lifeline. One of the last. And that's when I knew, it was time to bring the storm closer. He trusted me with stories now. Regrets. Memories. Secrets. He told me once that his biggest fear was being forgotten. It's not death that scares me, he said. It's disappearing. So I began crafting the final phase. Because if there's one thing worse than being hated, it's being erased. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. Not really. We lived under the same roof, ate in the same kitchen, slept in the same house, but the silence between us had weight now. Like ash. Thick, bitter, clinging to everything. And that was good. She needed to sit in it. Let it soak. But now it was time. I needed her to see me again. Not the man she married. Not the man she betrayed. But the man who had come out the other side of fire without a single burn. It started with small things. I left the door to the garage open, just enough for her to notice. I let her see the missing box of photographs, the empty space where our wedding album used to sit. I knew she'd never ask. That was the point. Then I started coming home late. No explanation. No calls. Just long silences, late arrivals, and a quiet smile when she looked confused. She asked once, "Where were you?" I said, "Out." That was all. I watched the question sit on her lips, then die without sound. On Thursday, I left a note on the fridge, "Don't wait up." No name. Just that. I came back past midnight. She was awake. In the living room. In her robe. The television was on, but muted. She didn't look at me when I entered. She didn't have to. I sat across from her. Poured myself a drink. Took my time. Then, finally, I said it, "I saw him today." She flinched. Not much. Just a tremor. But I saw it. She turned her head slowly, still not meeting my eyes. "You talked to him?" "No," I said. "Didn't need to." She stared at the floor. Waiting. "I know everything," I said. "And I'm not angry anymore." She looked at me then. Really looked. Her face was pale, her lips tight. "That's worse," she said. I nodded. She didn't cry. I think she wanted to. But the tears wouldn't come. Guilt does that. It dries the soul before it breaks it. "Do you love him?" I asked. Her silence was longer than it needed to be. "No," she said finally. "I just forgot how to feel." And he reminded me. I sipped my drink. "Then remember this." She looked up. I leaned forward. "You gave away 50 years for something that won't last 5. Then I stood and walked out. Not with rage. Not with pain. But with finality. I left her there, with the weight of what she'd done, and the silence of a man who no longer needed to raise his voice to win. Reputation is a fragile thing. You don't have to crush it with force. You just have to loosen the bolts and wait for the weight of it to do the rest. Mark had spent his life building an image, friendly, charming, a man who helped his neighbors shovel snow, who brought deviled eggs to block parties, who gave advice like he was a guru of suburban wisdom. But all that balance rested on assumption. The moment people began to question who he was, it would all crack. So I gave them questions. The first came in the form of a flyer. I printed 20 of them on plain white paper and pinned them up around town, a grocery store cork boards, coffee shop windows, the VFW hall. No name, no accusation. Just bold black letters. Do you really know who Mark T. Walden is? That was all. No details. Just the spark. A silent nudge. Within days, I heard the whispers. At the diner, someone at the next table said, "He's been acting different lately." Another, "I heard he got kicked off that charity board." No one confronted him. Not yet. But eyes lingered longer. Voices dropped when he walked by. The second came through an online forum, a local neighborhood watch group. I used a new profile, picture of a dog, generic name. I posted, just wondering if anyone else has had uncomfortable run-ins with Mark T. Walden? Not saying anything happened, but I've been hearing things. That's all it took. For comments. Then 10. Some supportive. Some defensive. But all participating. Mark came to me, angry. Someone spreading garbage about me. What kind of garbage? I asked. I don't know. It's vague. But it's getting around. You think it's someone you know? I thought I knew everyone. He looked at me then, as if searching. I didn't blink. They're just rumors, Mark. Let them pass. But they didn't. Because I didn't let them. At the hardware store, I paid a kid $50 to slip a folded note into Mark's truck while it sat parked. "We know what you did. Be careful." No signature. No threat. Just paranoia. The kind that wraps around the spine. That night, he called me from his porch. Voice shaking. Someone's following me. Or watching. I don't know. Have you done something worth watching? I asked, quiet. No. I let that hang. Then, softly, and then maybe it's in your head. But it wasn't. And he knew it. At the community center, he volunteered for a panel about aging with dignity. I made sure an anonymous letter arrived a day before the event. A copy of an old photo, blurry, poorly lit, but enough to suggest something. Mark and a woman, not my wife, another, younger. Laughing too closely. No context. No date. Just fuel. The panel was cancelled. Scheduling conflict, they said. But he knew. The next week, someone spray-painted his back fence. Just one word. Liar. He called the police. They made a report. Shrugged. Said it was probably kids. But Mark looked at me when he told the story. Looked long. I raised my eyebrows, concerned. Kids these days, I said. He was unraveling. He walked differently now. Shorter steps. Shoulders down. He started skipping the diner. Stopped going to the hardware store. He didn't return texts as quickly. He was folding inward, trying to find the center that no longer held. And I stayed right beside him. Calm. Listening. Ready. I wasn't finished. The last thing I did that week was leave a single envelope on his doorstep. Inside, a photo of my wife. Taken years ago. Before the affair. She was holding our first grandson. Smiling. Happy. And on the back, I'd written, "You didn't just take a woman. You took a world." No signature. He didn't call me for 2 days after that. When he finally did, he just said, "I think I've made a mistake." I waited. Then said, "You have no idea how much." The scariest kind of fall isn't physical. It's the moment when your mind stops trusting itself. When you question your own memories. When the reflection in the mirror looks familiar, but something's wrong in the eyes. That's where I was steering Mark. Not toward guilt. Not toward public shame. That had already begun. I wanted him to doubt himself, deeply, permanently. It began with old pictures. I found an online service that printed vintage-style photos. I uploaded 3 images of him and my wife, candid ones from years back, harmless smiles at some community barbecue. They weren't lovers yet. But they looked close. Close enough. I had them delivered anonymously in a plain envelope. No note. Just the pictures. He called me the next day. Someone sent me photos. He stopped. Huh. From years ago. Where the hell did those come from? I played dumb. Photos? Like what? He hesitated. It doesn't matter. But it did. I heard it in his breath. He wasn't remembering clearly anymore. He was starting to ask himself if maybe he'd been thinking of her all along. Before it ever began. If maybe it hadn't been impulse, maybe it had been building. And that's the crack I needed. I followed up a week later with a call, pretending to reminisce. Remember that barbecue at the Franklin house? I said. You and she were always off to the side, laughing. I used to joke about it. You guys looked like high schoolers. He didn't laugh. You remember that? I said again. Yeah. I guess. He didn't. Not really. But now he thought he should. I hung up. That night, I left another envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 5 years ago, an article about the same community barbecue. I'd circled a single line in red, and Mark Walden seen chatting with neighbor's wife for most of the afternoon. The article wasn't about him. It was fluff. A community write-up. But the detail was real. Tangential. Dangerous. He didn't call after that. A few days later, I saw him outside his house, staring at the photo I'd sent, the newspaper in his hand. He looked tired. Pale. The way men look after nightmares they can't shake. I approached, slow. Everything okay? He looked up. Eyes distant. Do you think I'm a bad person? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Then said, I think we all are. We just lie better some days than others. He nodded, but I knew I'd cut deep. He was losing grip. Not just on others, but on himself. And that's the last piece of any man. You take that, and you own what's left. The final act doesn't need to be explosive. It needs to be silent. Precise. Like the last turn of a key in a door that's been locked for years. And I was holding that key. By now, Mark was a ghost of who he used to be. He walked like his bones had forgotten what pride felt like. His shirt always slightly wrinkled. Hair no longer combed. He used to wear cologne. I hadn't smelled it in weeks. I kept showing up, of course. Like a good friend. Sitting across from him as he fidgeted, asked questions I never answered. He was searching, for control, for meaning. For the moment things had gone wrong. But there was nothing left to hold on to. It was time. I called a contact, someone from my time consulting on private security systems. The kind of man who knew how to make things look messy, but real. For a price. All I needed was one afternoon. One house. One set of files. I gave him Mark's address. Told him where to find the guest room closet. That's where I'd planted the USB drive a week earlier, labeled innocently, but filled with falsified documents. Fake transactions. Browser histories. Records of correspondence with women under questionable circumstances. All built from scratch. Digital fingerprints crafted with care. They weren't perfect. They didn't need to be. Just believable. Just enough. The tip went to local authorities anonymously. I found something disturbing in a friend's house. I think someone should look into it. 2 days later, Mark was sitting across from 2 investigators in his kitchen. No arrest. Not yet. Just questions. Just enough to spread. I saw him that evening. He didn't say much. Just stared at his hands like they were no longer his. I asked, "Rough day?" He nodded. Didn't elaborate. And then came the letter. I printed it on crisp white paper. No return address. Inside, a single line. You won't be remembered for who you were. Only for what I made you. He read it. I know he did. He didn't mention it. But I saw it in the way he looked at the world afterward, like every shadow had a mouth, every silence a name. The community began pulling away completely. No one said why. They didn't need to. The whispers were enough. The implication was stronger than any truth. He stopped going out altogether. I'd walk past his house and see him through the window, sitting in the dark. Lights off. Phone untouched. Curtains drawn. One evening, I knocked. He didn't answer. I left him a bottle of his favorite scotch on the step. No note. The next morning, it was still there. That night, I stood across the street and just watched. His silhouette was barely visible. Just a man inside a house he no longer knew how to live in. He called me once more. Why? He asked. I didn't pretend. I didn't lie. I trusted you, he said, voice thin, cracking. You shouldn't have, I answered. A long silence. Then just a click. He didn't call again. It was almost done. But there was one thing left, something not even he would see coming. The last thing a man hears before his life ends isn't a gunshot. It's silence. A silence that wraps around his thoughts and squeezes. I didn't want Mark to scream. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted him to fade. The final move had to be personal. Quiet. One-on-one. And irreversible. I waited until the last Saturday in October. The air was crisp. The kind of chill that gets into your chest and makes you remember things you don't want to. I knew he'd be home. He hadn't left the house in days. I rang the bell. He answered. Hollow-eyed, thinner. Like something had been leaking out of him slowly. Can I come in? I asked. He stepped aside. No words. We sat in the living room, lights off. Late afternoon sun spilled through the blinds, slashing the room into gold and shadow. I have something for you, I said, handing him a brown envelope. He took it. Hands shaking. What is it? A story, I said. The truth. In pictures, documents, letters. You'll recognize some. Others you won't. But read it all. He opened it. Looked down. I watched his eyes move across the pages. First, the receipt from the motel. Dated. Signed. Room 214. Then, printed screenshots of text messages. Fabricated. But real enough. Intimate language. Desperation. Regret. Next, photoshopped images. My wife. Him. Smiling. Kissing. Enough to tell a story. Enough to be undeniable. Lastly, a letter. Written in my hand. Addressed to the people who deserve the truth. He looked at me. Mouth open. No sound. What is this? It's the version of your life that everyone will believe, I said. Because now it's documented. You not going to? I don't have to, I interrupted. I won't send it. Not unless I have to. But it exists now. And you know it does. That's all that matters. He put the envelope down like it might burn him. His breath quickened. Face pale. What do you want from me? He whispered. Nothing, I said. Then why? I stood up. Walked to the window. Looked out at the dying light. Because you took something I can't get back. And now, so have I. He didn't answer. I turned back. You'll never be sure what's real anymore. You'll never trust a laugh, or a kind word, or your own memory. You'll never know if this will surface. If someone will find it. If I'll change my mind one day. That's your life now. He tried to speak. Couldn't. I walked to the door. Stopped. Looked at him once more. You're not a villain, Mark. Just a man who thought he'd never pay the bill. But the check always comes. Eventually. And I left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Trees stripped bare. Sky heavy with the kind of silence that tastes like endings. I didn't look back. There's nothing back there for me anymore.